Let me say at the outset that this is not a review. It cannot be, as I've not completed the game. At the time of the making of this video, I've completed a little over 30 hours, which is insufficient for a review for a game the size of Starfield. However, this amount of time is more than sufficient for an explanation as to why this game has me fundamentally worried about Bethesda Game Studios as a developer, and furthermore, greatly worried about the one game many of us actually care about, and the one, I will argue, Starfield is a mere placeholder for. Elder Scrolls 6, a game that if we are even still around when it is out, will be 17 or 20 years in the waiting. And if Starfield is a harbinger of things to come, then we should all be very, very worried about not just the future of Elder Scrolls, but Bethesda Game Studios as a whole, and their ability to make games. AAA these days just seems to be fake reviews and people greenlighting mediocrity because of social media pressure. But let's launch into it. Starfield, sometimes lovingly referred to as Starfield, is an overly ambitious game that suffers from an identity crisis, that tries to do too much and succeeds at none of the many things it tries to do. This is a hot take, but in my humble opinion, it is by far the worst Bethesda single-player sandbox I have ever played, and I've been playing them since the 90s. All of the fundamental problems of the game, I'm fairly confident in saying, will not be improved by another 100 hours or 200 hours of gameplay, though I might be able to force myself through the slog that this game is for a proper review. Time will tell. Let's then begin with the most obvious and most egregious failure of the game, and that is that it does not capture the spirit of every previous single-player Bethesda title prior to it. A fundamental and essential component of Bethesda games is the exploratory factor, and I am going to argue that Starfield's systems are antithetical to that spirit of exploration because of the setting of the game, outer space. Exploration is of utmost importance in an open-world sandbox RPG, such as the sort that Starfield purports to be, and most of the Bethesda titles of more recent years, including all of the single-player Fallout games, as well as their Elder Scrolls titles, do justice to. In Fallout, as a vault dweller, you leave your vault for the first time, see the sun, and instantly look out at the landscape, ready to explore and go anywhere you like. The same holds true for the Elder Scrolls, as once you leave your prisoner status behind, you have an entire world to explore, walking to mountains in the distance, or the cave you spied just west of you. If you see it, you can go there, and Fallout and Elder Scrolls accomplish this quite well. Starfield, however, does not, and there's a simple reason for this: scope and containment. In order to allow for a player to explore his environment thoroughly and properly, no matter how big an environment might be, that environment ultimately has to be contained and limited. And that is why the open world sandbox concept works so well in Fallout and Elder Scrolls, and so terribly in Starfield. Starfield is not a contained environment. At least, it pretends not to be. Note, the pretension is that you have an entire galaxy to explore, but by attempting to do so, you end up actually exploring very little. Starfield has simply bitten off more than it can chew in terms of its scope. The seeming compromise that Bethesda has struck when it comes to exploration is endless loading screens, unimmersive fast travel, as well as endless pseudo-maps that you have to bring up in order to go anywhere. Starfield does everything it can to curtail the exploratory spirit of Bethesda games in a setting where you would think it would be its greatest expression. Put very simply, traveling in Starfield is not fun at all. It is a slog, it is a chore, and tedious, and greatly takes away from the joy of exploration. You might argue that this is a game of galactic proportions, and you would in theory be right. But whatever Bethesda has done, they have made exploring the galaxy as tedious and mind-numbing as possible. Why this is, one can only surmise, as I cannot know the mind of God Howard, but I'm sure that he and his team have their reasons. There are other space games that do a better job of it, so we know it's not impossible, and this limitation ties in, unfortunately, very neatly with the poor world-building aspect of Starfield as a game. When you make a game about outer space, there are basically 2.5 options, all of which take into account, whether formally or informally, the concept known as Fermi's paradox. And for those of you who don't know, Fermi's paradox is a hypothesis put forth by the physicist Enrico Fermi in 1950, which states that if the universe is as vast as it observably is, why is there no intelligent alien life that we are aware of? And in the game, option 1 is that you fill your universe with tons of aliens, both sentient and non-sentient, such as the universe of Mass Effect, which has advanced alien civilizations, as well as complex, multi-solar spanning political organizations, and Star Trek is also set in this vein. Option 2 is that you make the universe completely empty, and option 2.5, which is the route that Bethesda has gone down, is that you sprinkle the universe with occasional unintelligent alien life, whilst maintaining the maximal anthropocentric take on space exploration possible, which is what Bethesda has done. It's for this reason that Starfield vaguely feels like Fallout in space, because its setting and philosophy is so incredibly human-centric. We are seemingly the only sentient life in the universe, and we have to run with it. Now, I know why Bethesda made this decision. Realism. Based on most cosmological models in current-day physics and cosmology, Starfield's universe seems to be the most plausible one, and it is one in which most planets have no life whatsoever, and the few that do have strange, albeit unintelligent alien life forms. However, if you decide to go down what I call the Fermi Paradox Light route, you need to find a way to make this anthropocentric universe interesting and engaging, and Starfield just fails colossally at this endeavor. There are ways to make such a setup engaging, but the bare-bones approach of hundreds of hollow and procedurally generated empty planets, where the only activity is scanning them, and it is a tedious scanning at that, is not one of them. Even if our galaxy is likely this way, that doesn't necessarily translate into fun in a game if you don't know how to implement it properly. For example, although not really a science fiction game or space game per se, the game Factorio does this well. You are focused on mining, building, infrastructure, and researching technologies, which you can sort of do in Starfield, but it is incredibly superficial, as are most things in the game, and doesn't really contribute much to the setting, and therefore falls by the wayside as fairly unnoticeable. I would vastly prefer an anti-Fermi paradox game such as Mass Effect, with deep lore, ancient civilizations, and complex politics, to what Bethesda has served us. Whether accurate or not, Bethesda's vision of the universe is just plain boring, and it's not fun. One of the great joys of exploring Tamriel in the Elder Scrolls is the discovery of, say, Iliad or Dwemer ruins, and ancient history and civilizations, and even Fallout, with its much more curtailed history, still offers that possibility, as you explore hollowed-out buildings that used to serve a purpose in a better time. Starfield is almost entirely lacking in this, and it makes the already terrible exploration that much worse. In an empty, uncivilized universe, there is no such history. The closest I came to this was exploring a century-plus-old prison on a frozen planet, and this was actually decent, but such things are few and far between in the game. If Bethesda's primary goal was to create a sense of wonder and awe at the vastness of space, then they have failed at that task. There's just no way around this. The other glaring, or should I say staring issues, are much more technical. Now, I'm not someone obsessed with graphics, but when your universe is populated by bug-eyed zombie humans shuffling about their business, and the faces you design look worse than a game you made over 12 years ago, then there is a problem. I almost feel bad complaining about this, but the terrible character models are just plain immersion breaking. Every place I travel to has not humans, but bug-eyed zombies masquerading as humans. And when you consider that Skyrim was able to make much better faces, then all I can say is that there has been a regression. And what's more, the other day when playing, I discovered what might possibly be the worst case of reuse assets ever in a game, namely a character model of a woman used in the same and adjacent rooms, not once, not twice, not thrice, but 7 or 8 times. Literally the same, perfectly identical model, with the customary zombie bug eyes, of course. Now here's the hot take. combat is the worst it's ever been in the last 12 years of Bethesda games, as neither gunplay nor melee are satisfying. There is no VAT system, and there are no finishers. Ship combat is very uninspired, and it's the only aspect of flying your ship that actually matters that does not involve endless loading screens. The game has an incredible number of objects, and merely picking up a few of them encumbers you. Yes, the encumbrance system is absolutely terrible and the worst to date, and I could go on, but I think you get the picture. If there were one word to describe this game, it would be tedious. It is a painful slog to get through, and I doubt I will ever finish the game, and I say that with 30 plus hours. It's just a very tedious, dull, and uninspired universe Bethesda has created, and their worst single-player game to date. Which leads us to our primary concern, at least my primary concern, and the title of the video. What does this mean for Elder Scrolls 6? Suffice to say, it does not bode well for Elder Scrolls 6, and Starfield should be a concerning release for anyone who actually cares about the Elder Scrolls universe. And let's be honest, for many of us, our foray into Starfield was simply a placeholder for the game we actually wanted to play, Elder Scrolls 6. By the time the next Elder Scrolls game comes out, it will likely be 2028 or later, and none of us is getting younger. And where circumstances normal, i.e. more development time leads to a better game, I would be all for it. But Starfield, which had an 8-year development cycle, has shown us that the opposite can very easily be true as well. Just because a game has a long development period does not mean it will be very good by any means. And there are a few possibilities concerning the outcome of Elder Scrolls 6 in light of the failure of Starfield. It could be the case that Bethesda was simply vastly out of their element with Starfield and have bitten off more than they can chew, something I firmly believe is actually the case, and that they simply were not up to the task for reasons cited in the beginning, as outer space is not a contained unit, which was what they were used to for their entire career, up until now at least. However, that does not explain the downgrade in character design and appearance, or the zombie bug eyes. Still, it could also mean that a more contained setting, such as Hammerfell or High Rock, where the next Elder Scrolls is rumored to take place, might still be well done. Or pessimistically, you might take into account Starfield as a total package, and that this signals the death knell of Bethesda as a competent developer. Something went very wrong, and we're not privy to the internal operations of Bethesda, and therefore all we can do is speculate. We just don't know what happened. Will whatever went wrong with Starfield also negatively affect the Elder Scrolls 6? I fear it is very likely, but part of me obviously wants to believe that the so-called Bethesda magic is still there, and that they can deliver a convincing and fulfilling Elder Scrolls 6. That said, you know what they say in the gaming industry. You're only as good as your last game. And in the case of Bethesda, their last 3 games have been, on a sliding scale, increasingly of lower and lower quality. Fallout 4 was worse than Fallout 3, Fallout 76 is not even a single-player game, and everyone knows how that went. And Starfield, well, by now we also know how that went. None of this is promising. So I have to rely on the weight of the evidence that we have to reluctantly forecast doom on the horizon. And Elder Scrolls 6 released 17 plus years after the previous one, that is potentially worse in most ways than its predecessor. It gives me no joy to say this, but it seems very likely that it will be this way. Of course, I would be overjoyed to be proven wrong, as I take no pleasure in doomsday prophecies. But what else can we say after the vast emptiness of space and vast emptiness of quality that is unfortunately Starfield? We have to remain aware that the technology and design of Bethesda's one game will be decisive for the next. It's just unavoidable. And that's very telling for the future of Elder Scrolls 6. And yes, modders over the years will probably fix the game. But relying wholesale on modders to make your game enjoyable is not a good look, and it's one that Bethesda has increasingly relied on over the years. Modding has always been a core part of the Bethesda experience, but it cannot be the sole part of that experience. To quote none other than God Howard himself, it just doesn't work. But before I go, I'd like to invite you to my Discord server, where you can discuss Baldur's Gate 3 with like-minded people, as well as many other RPGs, even Starfield. As always, thank you for tuning in, And if you like my content, you can leave a like, comment, share, and subscribe. And if you hit the bell icon, you'll be informed of my videos. It'd be much appreciated. It really helps out the channel. And I'll check you out next time. Take care.